So, if you've ever visited the 40K subreddits or have delved a little too deep into the comment sections, there seems to be this weird narrative going around that somehow the Necrons were these gigachat god killers who just decided to sleep for 60 million years after beating the Eldari, the Old Ones, and hell, even the Krogs. Not because they had to go sleep, but because they simply didn't care about fighting anymore. That if they wanted to, they could have won the war in heaven with ease, but chose not to. On top of that, some folks are even pushing the idea that the Eldar were afraid of the Necrons and left the tomb worlds untouched after they went into their 60 million year long slumber. But that doesn't line up at all with what's actually in the lore. The truth is, the Necrons were completely spent after the war in heaven. They and the Catan had destroyed the Old Ones, and then the Necrons imprisoned and shattered the weak at Catan. But it cost them dearly. They were in no condition to fight the rising Eldari, who had fought alongside the Old Ones and inherited their mantle as the galaxy's dominant species. The Silent King saw the writing on the wall. They couldn't win, so he ordered the Necrons into stasis. But where does this come from? Why do people believe the Necrons won? What actually happened during the war in heaven? How did the Eldari manage to sweep the angry robot race? Or is there something more to it? Maybe it wasn't a clean sweep at all. What if the sources contradict each other? And we, the audience, have to figure out what the 40K writers truly intended for us to believe. Well, in today's video we are going to cover all that and a whole lot more, going over the various sources from both sides to piece together the truth and seeing who really won the war in heaven. Enough yapping, let's get into the video. To start out, what was the war in heaven? I'm gonna give you an abridged quick version, otherwise we will be here for the next 5 hours. The Necron, a warlike and sickly people, start a war with the Old Ones, reptilian demigods that spread life throughout the stars on the whim of creation. Either the Necrons are jealous of their immortality, or because their empire fractures from internal pressure is unclear. The Necron lose horribly as the Old Ones' empire spans the whole galaxy, while they only have their own system, or a small number in the newer fluff. Actually, the difference is so big that the Old Ones hardly acknowledge this as a war. The Necron find a special form on their sun which feeds on it, and is therefore responsible for the radiation and the Necron short lives. They call it Catan, Star Gold, and lure it into a specially made necrodermis, a suit of living metal. Said Catan likes to feed on more of Necron souls than suns, and calls himself the Deceiver. He offers the Necron a deal. They offer their loyalty to the Catan and give them those necrodermis. In exchange, they shall have immortality and become super warriors. The Necron agree. Then comes the biotransfer, where all Necron, willing or unwilling, get inserted into metal skeletons. Most Necron lose their soul. Only the elites keep part or even most of their souls. The high aristocracy keeps nearly all, including the Silent King. The Silent King gets the ultimate authority over the Necrons now. The now Necrons start the war in heaven again with the help of the Catan. The Catan of course pull their weight. The Catan are nearly impossible to kill, because fun fact, destroying the necrodermis just means they need to search for a new one. It doesn't actually hurt them. And also one is enough to rearrange a whole solar system in minutes. The war goes badly for the Old Ones, so they create two warrior races. The Eldar, psychic active beings like the Old Ones, only less powerful, but they breed like rabbits. The others are the Krogs, super strong beings that don't use the warp, but a kind of shared mental network known as Wa, that can also bend reality, and again, they breed like nobody's business. Those two races help the Old Ones significantly, but they are not enough. Even the fact that the Catan known as the Reaper starts eating the other Catan to get stronger isn't enough to change the tides of war. In the war, trillions of beings die at the same time, eaten by the Catan or merely collateral damage when they explode a sun for fun. The Necrons even breach into the webway, the greatest technology the Old Ones have created. In the end, the Old Ones are exterminated. But that is the moment the Silent King betrays the Catan and orders his army to sunder them apart and to imprison their shards into interdimensional prisons known as Tesseract Labyrinths. Only a few escape, including the Reaper, the Aramid, the Deceiver and the Dragon. One of these Catan curses the Necrons and actually dies to impart the Flayed One's curse upon them. The Silent King, ashamed about his role in all of this, gives one last order. All Necrons shall sleep for a few million years before he goes into exile and resigns his authority over them. That's the end. The Old Ones are dead, the Necrons sleep, and the galaxy is a mess. But who truly won? Let's have a look at what the Necrons think in the 8th edition Necron Codex. Yet even with the defeat of the Old Ones and the Catan alike, the Silent King saw that the time of the Necrons was over for the moment. The mantle of galactic dominion would soon pass to the Eldar, a race who had fought alongside the Old Ones throughout the War in Heaven and had thus come to hate the Necrons and their works. The Eldar had survived where the Old Ones had not, and the Necrons, weakened during their overthrow of the Catan, could not stand against them. And the following source, from the 9th edition Necron Codex. Zarek saw that his people's time was done, for they could not face the Old One's vengeful servants, the Eldari chief amongst them. It is said that the Silent King commanded his people to inter themselves within the stasis crypts of their tomb cities, there to sleep out the eons until they could rise again to conquer all. And to really make sure this is all meant in the way we think we understand it, let's look at the infinite and the divine. Yet, in destroying the Old Ones and the divine Catan, even the implacable Necrons had overtaxed themselves. It was clear the Eldari were the rising race, and would shape the galaxy's next great epoch. Alright, so from the Necrons' perspective, most of them actually believed they lost. But what about the Eldar? If they won, why didn't they just obliterate all tomb worlds? It's first important to understand the Eldari were fully aware of where every single tomb world really was. They had an entire map, as seen in the following quote. Once, a great crystalline map marked the locations of every tomb world in the galaxy. Now, only fragments remain, and it is these that the Eldari of Aleitok use in conjunction with their far-flung networks of the Exodites and Outcasts to begin to orchestrate the battle against the Necron menace. Even as other craft worlds are re-honing half-remembered strategies or debating the best course of action, the people of Aleitok strike preemptively at slumbering tomb worlds and the legions of the Risen. The Eldar were actively destroying tomb worlds whenever they could find them. Many of the Necron tomb complexes had been destroyed, whether by natural disasters or the vengeful attention of the Eldari, who had sought out Zarekan worlds with particular venom. But there is another side. The Eldari got lazy, if you can believe it. They let victory slip from their fingers while the Necrons slept, as seen in Rise of the Inari, Wild Rider. We should have hunted them down when we were at full power, declared Nuadu, the display of the Seers letting him understand anew what he had known and forgotten. Indeed, and there lies perhaps our greatest error, said Eleanor. The fall was but the consequence of the lapse in rigor that occurred so many generations before even the first of the pleasure cults was formed. Isgara raised a crystal hand to his brow, head bowed in sorrow at the thought. Complacency. We did not see our foes defeated entirely, but were content that they would never return. From that contentment and comfort were sown the seeds of our later woe. Folly of the highest order. Although this doesn't give a full answer, it does allow us to believe in two separate things. Maybe in their mastery of the universe and their hubris, they no longer felt threatened by their slumbering foe. Maybe the fact that the Eldar didn't go around exterminating random species extended to the Necrons, and they didn't think it honorable to finish off a sleeping foe. Or number 2, perhaps the Eldar were war-weary by that point and didn't feel like going on a million-year-long crusade of extermination. They aren't robots, they have wants and desires, and by the time they got warbot armies, they were too far into developing culture and science to care about restarting extermination campaigns at all. We know for a fact that even some modern Eldar get sick of war, in a world where survival is on the line. I can see them being sick of it in a campaign against an enemy that isn't even fighting back. But there is more to this story. How weak were the Necrons really after the war? How much damage did they sustain from trying to imprison and break apart the Catan? As seen in the 8th edition Necron Codex. Throughout the final stages of the War in Heaven, Zarek bided his time, waiting for the moment in which the Catan would be vulnerable. Though the entire Necron race was his to command, he could not hope to oppose the Catan at the height of their power. Even if he did, and was somehow met with success, the Necrons would still then have to finish the War in Heaven alone. No, the Old Ones had to be defeated before the Catan could be brought to account for the horror they had wrought. And so it was. When the Catan finally won their great war, their triumph was short-lived. With one hated enemy finally defeated, and the other spent from hard-fought victory, the Silent King started to revolt against their star gods. Clearly, the Silent King knew the Catan were far beyond their strength. The War in Heaven had weakened them through constant fighting. Zarek was probably marshalling his forces and power accordingly. It's safe to assume he let the Catan do the heavy lifting until they were spent and weakened. Then, he struck. So, with all of this in mind, the Necrons did not go to sleep because they were this gigachat empire that could have taken on the Eldar, but they let them rule. They went to sleep because they couldn't win. The Silent King made a long-term move to outlive the Eldar, not outfight them. People forget that the Eldari gods were still a thing, and Necron's 8th edition confirms they fought against the Catan at the end of the War in Heaven. Kain still fought the Nightbringer, Chakarak defeated the Outsider, and Val wounded the Void Dragon. This is the reason why, even though the Old Ones were defeated, the Catan couldn't roll over what remained of the Old Ones' races. And this makes sense, since other than the Old Ones, the only thing that can stand against an uncharted Catan is a Warp God. Hence, even when the Catan were defeated, the Necrons were too exhausted to fight against another pantheon and smartly waited them out. Also, super quick side tangent, we keep hearing that these goddamn space vampire super reality gods got rolled. But let me make it clear, the Catan put up one hell of a fight. Here's 3 examples. Number 1. Kain's fight against the Nightbringer was extremely close, and Kain only won because he heeded the advice of Chakarak. Number 2. Assyrian collapsed a solar system on the Nightbringer to defeat him, but it's also hinted that the Nightbringer killed Assyrian, and he had to be resurrected by Isha. Number 3. The Void Dragon was said to be the most powerful of the Catan. In the original lore, Val put him into hibernation on Earth, but in modern lore, he grievously wounded it, weakened it enough for the Necrons to shard it, and then the Emperor of Mankind himself had to put the shard to sleep, creating the entire Adeptus Mechanicus we know today. Yeah, they were quite strong. But yeah, the Silent King did a smart thing by not fighting the Eldar. The War in Heaven was over, the Necrons had suffered immense losses, fighting the Old Ones and their creations, and then the Catan must have drained their resources immensely. And if you actually read the codexes, a dead Necron is gone forever and cannot be replaced. Once the body and the soul is gone, there's nothing left. Guessing that the Eldar and Krogs were in a much better shape than them is very reasonable, because at this time the Eldar were still able to just rematerialize themselves, and the Krogs, you know, they kind of just did the orc thing and grew all over planets. The Necrons' biggest advantage, of course, besides their technology, was time. The Silent King used this perfectly, and his plan in the end worked in a way. The Eldar ruled, built an empire, and then fell. Seeing how the Eldar Empire fell in a relatively short time compared to their slumber, it was still quite a gamble, because if anything, if the Eldar were more warlike and wanted to keep fighting, they might have ended the entire ordeal. But here's the weird thing. 2 sources somehow say that the Necrons won? Number 1. Deathwatch, The Outer Reach, page 102. All through the long war in heaven, the Silent King had nurtured his hatred for the Catan, even as he led his army against their foes. Knowing the Necrons could never defeat the Old Ones on their own, he had done all that the Catan had bid. Yet, with the war finally won, the Silent King enacted a betrayal long prepared for. And here we see the Old Ones being fully defeated and the Necrons saying they won, in the Codex Necrons 5th edition, page 7. With the Catan and Necrons fighting as one, the Old Ones were now doomed to defeat. Glutted on the life force of the Necrons here, the empowered Catan were nigh unstoppable and unleashed forces beyond comprehension. Planets were erased, suns extinguished, and whole systems devoured by black holes, called into being by the reality warping powers of the Star Gods. Necron legions finally breached the webways and assailed the Old Ones in every corner of the galaxy. They brought under siege the fortresses of the Old Ones' allies, harvesting the life forces of the defenders to feed their masters. Ultimately beset by the implacable onset of the Catan and the calamitous warp spawn perils that they had themselves mistakenly unleashed, the Old Ones were defeated, scattered, and finally destroyed. Now that we know all this, both sides can kind of claim victory, depending on how you view victory. The Eldar were left the undisputed masters of the galaxy for eons, the Necrons forced into hiding and hunted. Victory for the Eldar. But on the other hand, the Necrons saw the total defeat of the Old Ones, shattered the Catan, and took a tactical retreat to wait for the Eldar to fall from glory before rising once again. Victory, Necrons. Things get weird when you consider the passage of time from the POV of an immortal. In reality, they lost the battle, but they might actually have won the war. But at the other side, the Eldar definitely won the war in heaven. It is also unclear if the Krogs ever fought alongside the Eldari themselves, most likely fighting from the sideline, raiding and obliterating Necron tomb worlds, until reaching the borders of the Eldari Empire, causing trouble, and probably getting put in the timeout corner, where they slowly evolved into the orcs we know today. But if you want more info on that, go watch my Krogs video I did last week. But in all honesty, they didn't do too much in the grand scheme of things. They were just expendable shock troops at best, a designed weapon for only limited use. But that does it for today. Who do you believe won the war in heaven? Did the Eldar win the war and beat the Necrons, only to fail by themselves? Or was this actually some genius plan by the Necrons to out-immortal the Eldar, just to finally rule the galaxy as they were always meant to be? Anyways, thank you all for watching, like and subscribe if you haven't already, let me know your comments, suggestions, ideas and other things down in the comment section below, and I'll be seeing you in the next one. Bye bye.